In this lesson video, we will continue discussing Excel tables. We will use the file from the previous lesson. One feature of the Excel table that you may have noticed in a previous lesson is the automatic freeze pane. Indeed, we have discussed freeze panes in depth in earlier lessons. But the freeze pane feature in the Excel table is a little different from the usual freeze pane. If we scroll down on the Excel table, you can see it here. Instead of making the header row static in a grid area, the header titles appear in this upper area, taking over the column letters. If we scroll up again until the row header is visible, this upper area will be filled again with the column letters. Now, you need to know that this feature will only work if the cell selection is inside the Excel table area. If you click on a cell outside the table, for example here, in this condition, scrolling down will not trigger the freeze pane feature. If you have an Excel table, then open the Table Design menu. You will see several options in the Table Style Options section. The first is Header Row. It is used to show or hide the header section above the table. Then, we can use the First Column option if we want the first column to have different formatting from the other cells. If this option is active, and you open the Table Styles list, you will see some new styles that were not there before. Some have a different color for the first column. For example, we choose this blue one. We can see now the first column is darker. The last column option is similar to the first column, except that it affects the last column or the rightmost column. So this is for the first column, on or off, and this is for the last column, on or off. Next is the Filter button option. This checkbox is used to turn on or off the small buttons for sorting and filter in a header area. Apart from this button, if you go to the Data menu, you can also toggle the sorting and filter feature using this Filter button. We won't cover sorting and filter again in this lesson because we've already covered them in depth in previous lessons. The next option is Total Row. This option will add a dynamic row at the bottom of the Excel table that contains the total value of the numbers above it. Unfortunately, we don't have any numerical data that can be totaled in this column, so the resulting total value is irrelevant. But this column has numeric data. We can click on this cell and change the total setting to Sum to add up all the numbers above. Or you can select Average if you want to know the average value. You can also select Min here to display the minimum value, etc. Let me turn off this feature for now. The last two options are these banded rows and banded columns. What banded means is the color stripe effect you see in the grid area. Banded rows means the color of the rows will be alternated between dark and light. Meanwhile, banded columns means the color of the columns will be alternated between dark and light. You can activate both at the same time if you want, but usually, the option that we need is only the banded rows. The function of this feature is to make it easier for us to read the data, especially those that extend far horizontally. Rarely do people use this banded column feature, and it is even rarer for people activating both options at the same time. But at least, the options are there if you ever need them. One benefit of the Excel table is how easy it is to make data selections. For now, make sure we scroll up until the very top. Suppose we want to select all the data in the residence column. If we just click on a column letter like this, then Excel will select all cells in this column, including the empty cells below that we don't use. To select only the cells in a column that are part of the Excel table, you only need to hover your mouse slightly below the line of this column letter. Notice how the cursor changes to a big arrow. If we move it down a bit, it will turn into a four-way arrow. If we move it down again a little, it will turn into a big arrow again. In this condition, if we click, then all cells in this column will be selected, but only the cells that are part of this table. We can see that the cells outside the Excel table will not be selected. You can also use the same technique to select rows. So don't click here, but move it a little to the right, and then click. We can see the selection result like this. Now, let's go back to the column selection. If we scroll down the worksheet so that the freeze pane feature is working, to select the cells in a certain column inside the table, just click on the header names of these columns. We can see the selection result is the same as the previous technique, that is, it will not select the empty cells below. Next, you can also select the entire Excel table quickly. The first method is to move the mouse cursor to the top left corner, but slightly into the grid area, until you see the cursor changes to the single big arrow like this. If you click, the entire Excel table will be selected. The second method is by clicking on the edge of the table. But for this to work, you need to make sure that the cell selection is inside the table area. Which cell doesn't matter. Then hover the mouse cursor to the edge of the table until the mouse cursor changes to this four-way arrow symbol. If you click, all cells in the Excel table will get selected. The last method to select the whole Excel table is with the shortcut Ctrl-A. Just as before, you must first make sure that the cell selection is inside the table area. If you press Ctrl-A once, then all the data cells from the Excel table will be selected, but not the header cells. If you press Ctrl-A again a second time, now the entire Excel table, including the header cells, will be selected. And if you press Ctrl-A again for the third time, all cells in the worksheet will get selected. The last benefit of Excel tables that we want to cover is their naming. If you open the Table Design menu, on the left side, you will find the name of the Excel table that is currently active. By default, it will have a generic name like Table 1, Table 2, and so on. We can and should rename tables to something more meaningful. For example, we can change the name to Students. You need to remember that the rules for naming a table are basically the same as the rules for naming cell references. We discussed this in earlier lessons. Just to refresh our memory, the name must begin with a letter or with an underscore and should not start with a number. Then, you are not allowed to use spaces or special characters. And lastly, the name must be unique, meaning it is not already used by other Excel tables or by other cell references in the same workbook. If you have an Excel table, and besides it, you also have a named cell reference. For example, we can select these 4 cells. Then open the Formulas menu, and then click on the Define Name button. Give it any name, for example, Example. Then enter. Now we have 2 names in this workbook. If you open the Name Manager window by clicking this button, or by using the shortcut Ctrl F3, we can see both names on this list. But take a closer look at the icons. The name Example, the icon looks like this because it is a cell reference. As for the name Students, the icon looks like this because it is an Excel table. The benefit of creating names for Excel tables or cell references is that you can select them quickly by opening this drop-down list box and choose the name you want. This is to select the student's Excel table, and this is for selecting the example cell range. At this point, you might be thinking that this naming feature is insignificant. On the contrary, this feature is the most important feature of the Excel table if later we need to perform data analysis using pivot tables. We will cover pivot tables in more depth in the next lesson.